So welcome to today's webinar. We're so excited to be with you guys today. I know I've got a couple of people who have been a couple of my webinars, and I say it every time, but I mean it so much. This is my favorite part of my job. I love getting to interact with you guys and hopefully give you guys some content that really helps right now. As Irma was saying, as we were kicking off, things have changed so fast in the last couple of months. I would have never thought this is where we were sitting at this point in time. So we're hoping that we can give you stuff that helps as you're trying to adapt quickly, and with especially with the new school year starting, and most of it being kind of in this virtual setting. We hope that you get a lot out of today's session on engaging with a virtual audience. Oh, and I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Kara Wight, and I'm co-presenting this today with my wonderful and beautiful, fantastic colleague Irma Alvarez. And yeah, we're just really excited to share this with you guys today.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been great. Kara is a relatively newcomer relatively to our team, and I think this has been one of the most intense or most frequent collaborations between the two of us. So it's been great getting to know her better, and we've really had a lot of fun putting this together. So welcome. We decided to have this webinar because we're all communicating in this virtual environment, and we realized that whether you're presenting, participating in a meeting, leading a class, facilitating a conversation, which we do in the organizational development world all the time, it brings a unique set of challenges with it, right? This whole virtual engagement, communication. So a strong virtual presence is what allows you to engage and build credibility with your audience. And in this webinar, we'll show you ways on how to connect with people, with your audience, with authenticity, so that you can achieve that purpose, whatever purpose in your communication, and inspire, influence, and include people across the digital divide. So we'll give you tips, we'll give you experiences, because we've experienced this a lot ourselves, and we want to hear from you too. So we have a relatively small group, so that allows us for more interaction. Feel free to use the chat box. And now I pass it on to Kara.
Yes, and like Irma was saying, we've learned a lot in our transition to a virtual space. Obviously, we engage with a virtual audience almost daily, so we've learned a lot, but we definitely haven't learned everything. So if you have tips and tricks you've learned, please share them with us too. We want this to be a place where we can share knowledge and just strengthen each other by sharing those things with each other. So please feel free to jump in. So to kick things off today, I want to challenge you guys to think about a time recently. It could be a meeting or a training, or I don't know, maybe one of our webinars if you've been to another one of our sessions, where you felt particularly engaged. Maybe right now, maybe you feel particularly engaged right now, I don't know. But think about a time that you were in one of these virtual settings where you felt particularly engaged in it. And I want you to think, and if you could throw your answers in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, what did the speaker or the deliverer of the message or the leader of the meeting do that kept you interested? What do you think they were doing on their end that kind of kept you engaged and motivated during the meeting?
They had energy. Okay. And how were you able to tell that, CLO, in their delivery? But tell us a little bit more about that. How were you able to capture that energy? Where did you notice it? Or how did you notice it? They use breakout rooms to make the whole thing feel more interactive, asking questions, relatable. So yeah, anything that you can give us to define what those qualities were.
Excellent.
Asking a lot of questions.
Included in questions. Awesome tone of voice. Yeah,
oh, so that's
absolutely.
What you meant. The tone of voice was engaging, and there was energy behind it. Okay, great.
Yep. Trying to engage too much to the point that it was distracting. I and probably guilty of that, trying to overcompensate for the physical space. But yeah, absolutely, there's definitely going too far for sure.
They included you on the questions, they included you with questions, right? So I think you mean that they asked questions and then you responded, and so there was this back and forth and this inclusion, interaction.
Excellent. Oh, I missed one.
They smiled and made jokes. Good.
I hope they were good jokes.
Yeah.
I can make jokes, but they're never very good.
Oh, they shared interests on higher education and diversity. So because there was the topic was also of interest to you, there was that common shared purpose. Yeah, that would make sense.
Excellent.
They were fun, knowing what they knew what they were talking about, activities, personal experiences. Yeah, that really builds connection. Yeah.
Yep.
And the slides were attractive. Great.
Great. Perfect. So thank you so much. I think there's definitely a lot in these settings, and I've got to say, like, Irma and I are feeling the pressure today, I'll say, to present an engaging webinar on engaging with a virtual audience. But I want you guys to think too, what did you do to stay involved? Because sometimes, no matter how engaging the speaker is, if people aren't doing their part on there, and maybe they're not engaged either. So what did you do that kept you engaged in the virtual setting?
And we want you to think about the other side of this too, because you will later see that understanding and thinking from your audience's perspective is also very important in this idea of engagement. So, and then remember, it takes two to tango for any communication, right? You need that back and forth. So, nice conversation while teaching. Oh, these are comments for us. Thank you. You put your phone away. Yes, that's what you did to engage. And you shared and you minimized your distractions.
I have to close my email, not even have it open. I don't want any of those like things that'll pop up, because I'll just hop over, check my email really quick, and then now I totally lost where I was.
Yeah. And Cielo, so since the speakers asked questions, you answered them. So there was the back and forth. Yeah, thank you. You took notes. Uh-huh.
Oh, I like Carissa's answer a lot too. Trying to think about the future and the goals, and kind of maybe how the topic that they were talking about ties into that. I think that could be really powerful. Absolutely.
Kept the training on full screen. Thank you. Yeah, to avoid. And so you were proactive in minimizing those distractions. Okay.
Very smart.
Okay. Great.
Oh, having your video on. I will say, when I have my video on, I'm definitely more engaged. No, not that you guys all need to turn your video on right now, but I agree. Like, I don't know, there's some like a little bit more pressure to be a little more focused for sure. Okay. Back and forth verbally when possible, and less chat box. I agree. I miss the like real people talk for sure.
Yeah. And then water nearby. Yeah, I do that too, so you don't have to get up and go. But the water bottle is right here.
Yep, you'll see me drinking because I get dry mouth whenever I train. Okay, awesome. Super great. Yeah, I think, and Irma touched on this. It does. It takes two to tango. And while we're talking today about what you can do as like the speaker or the presenter or maybe the team meeting facilitator, whatever role you're playing, it's important to remember what it's like to be on the other side. It's hard to see the other side right now because there is that physical distance, but it's super powerful to imagine and really put yourself in their shoes and try to design your experience around what they might be experiencing as well on their end, for sure. So these are our goals today, and we're going to call them the 4 Ps of virtual communication. But if you've attended Irma's public speaking class or you're in that space at all, they may look familiar as the 4 Ps of public speaking. And part of our goal today is to really show that in a lot of ways, the virtual space is not that different from the physical space. There are a couple, I mean, obviously there's some pretty big differences, but there are a couple that aren't super different. So they may look familiar because they are, and we're hoping today that we can kind of drive in this, like, it's not as different as it might feel. We just have to get over some of those initial obstacles to get you back into that place that you're used to being in and more comfortable in.
So the title of this presentation was Engaging with a Virtual Audience, but there is, we can move to the next
Oh,
slide.
sorry. Yep,
There's
yep,
definitely,
sorry.
that's okay. Kara's driving, so she's doing my slide driving. Um, it's this idea of to create that engagement, and it goes back to the back and forth between the audience and the presenter. To create that engagement, you need to have your you want to establish your virtual presence, right? Engaging your audience is directly related to that sense of confidence and comfort that you have to be able to establish your own virtual presence. So it requires a change of mindset. It's not just is everyone on? Can everyone hear me? It's really how you are experienced by others and how others experience you in this virtual environment. So it requires a little bit of a different way to think about the communication and how you're adapting it to the technology and the technical setting and the virtual setting. But it's all still, like in any communication, it's all about connecting with confidence and authenticity. That doesn't change. And so, it still doesn't change that as anything, it starts with being aware of the virtual environment and having virtual awareness. So let's move to the next slide and take a look at this idea of virtual awareness. Virtual communication is new to most of us, right? We're all kind of adapting and we're all moving and changing on both ends, from the speaker perspective and from the audience perspective. As Kara said earlier, we want to be mindful of the audience, and lately especially we all have been, we know what it feels like to be on the receiving end of this too, because we've been experiencing it together. So we're all going through this together. However, you can only say, another principle that we teach in many of our classes, you can only control yourself, right? So there's two things that you can do. You can prepare yourself for everything that you can. And then on your audience, on the audience side, you can establish expectations to help them also prepare and meet you halfway, right? So prepare to avoid any tech issues, any glitches, prepare by understanding how to use the tools, prepare clearly your work, your material, preparing the virtual room, preparing the experience. Remember that idea of experience in advance. And then setting the expectations for your audience, telling them how to express their opinions, use the chat box or raise your hand. How can they continue to participate and remain engaged? And now Kara will show us what's the same. Well, maybe I mentioned to you what some of the things that are the same, and maybe now Kara can show us what's a little different.
Yeah, so, and yeah, like we're talking about, there is a lot that's the same, but there are some big, very obvious differences that we kind of have to get over first before we can feel like it's the same again. And those two big differences are our physical distance. Irma and I, even though we're in the same building, we are on different floors on complete opposite sides of the building. So we are physically distanced. We are very far apart. And, 6 months ago, we would never have even thought about presenting this in this format. So that's a big difference that we're gonna have to get over. And also the psychological distance. Irma and I are both very comfortable and used to presenting in a classroom. So even this room that I'm in right now, I see all these empty seats, and it's so weird because we're used to being able to see faces and engage and interact, and you can tell by looking at someone's face whether they really understand the concept or not, and we can kind of break that down. But without that physical indicator to see what's going on and reading those faces, it's hard for us to get back into our groove, to deliver things that we would normally deliver in a way that we would deliver it, because we're not getting the same feedback, that the visual feedback that we're used to getting. So if we can kind of bridge these two gaps, this physical distance and the psychological distance, then we can fall into that place where we're a little more comfortable and a little more authentic and confident, and things can feel a little maybe even normal when we're delivering in a virtual setting. So we're going to go through those 4 P's of public speaking and how we can kind of tailor those 4 P's to really prepare you to bridge these two distances, these two really big gaps, to get you in a place where you're feeling comfortable engaging with your virtual audience.
Okay. So I'll kick us off with plan, because as you can imagine, all of this takes time. So the perfect way to introduce this material is with planning and knowing that it's never too soon to start, right? So begin planning early. In my experience, and I think for Kara too, well, we transitioned from teaching in person and doing a lot of things in person. We probably had maybe a week at the very most, we were thinking the other day, to completely switch our courses and everything else. Fortunately, now we've used all this time to learn and experience, and now we're sharing this knowledge with you so that you can use it to plan ahead of time and not have to do this in a rush.
Yeah, I really hope you don't have to plan it all in a week like we did. But if you do, it can be done. We did it. Learn from our mistakes.
We're happy to share all of them here with you today, right? But you know, when you're new to this environment, or even when you're even we have now gained a little bit more experience, but we're still practicing new tools, and every day we want to do something, you know, a little cooler and little different. So planning ahead helps you figure out, you know, what are some of the tools that are out there, learning about them, and again, get into this space of thinking differently about how you are going to deliver your communication and deliver your message. And just remember that even if you are adapting content that you had already developed before, I will say that my classes that were 2 or 3 hours long, it probably took me about 2 or 3 hours just to adapt the content into the virtual environment, just to think about what those activities were going to be and how, and we will share these things with you, but just plan ahead because you will need the extra time. And but next slide, before you say a word, there are 2 foundational aspects of communication that must be in place. And this is, again, same old. This doesn't change with virtual. This is always there. You must know your purpose and you must know your audience. You must know why you're communicating and to whom, or maybe with whom you are communicating, all right? So even though this webinar is focused on virtual engagement, we want to give you specific tools to apply these to, because they are the constant and they will help you when you develop the communication. They will help everything align so that you reach your expected purpose and outcomes, as well as connect with the audience. So purpose. Next slide. Thank you. Know what is your purpose, right? Is it to share knowledge? Is it to, you know, ignite action, to lead change, whatever it is that you're trying to do? And then knowing what that purpose is, and believing and understanding and changing your mindset to knowing that you can deliver this purpose will help you also figure out what is the outcome that you want out of this communication. So your purpose has not changed because of COVID or the circumstances. The reason and the purpose for your communication was there even before this virus came about. So that hasn't changed. That commitment, that urgency of that message, the passion that you have behind it, that is still there. So connect with that, recognize that, and know that that's still there and that it is still important to deliver that message. You got this, all right? So you can do this and it's still important. So don't let the virtual environment keep you back from getting that done. The other thing that knowing your purpose is going to clarify, or the other thing that you need to connect with, I'm sorry, is how are you trying to get the audience to, what are you going the audience to do with your message, right? So for that, you need to know your audience, right? Learn as much as you can about who they are. Put yourself in their shoes and look at it from the perspective that they are receiving your message. What do you think they expect to hear from you? What do you think they need to hear from you? We often use the word, you know, what's in it for me? Well, flip it around. What is in it for them, right? Are they your peer? Are they your direct report? Are they students? Who are they? What perspective are they looking at this from? What level of familiarity do they have with what you're saying? So do you need to change your tone? Maybe, you know, is your communication a formal one, or maybe something more relaxed? So thinking about all those things and what your audience expects from you and needs from you will also help you format and frame your communication. So the other piece about your audience, and the other piece that learning about your audience helps you, is that you can also anticipate any barriers that could get in the way of the communication. So learning about your audience also, and putting yourself in their shoes, helps you anticipate any things that might make them shut down to your message, or maybe things that could interfere with maximizing the opportunities to help them to connect and get engaged, right? It takes two, right? This back and forth that we're trying to connect, to create. So, so thinking about your audience and what they need, what they expect, will also help you create the tone, right? And will also, as you start thinking about it, you'll see that you'll start coming up with ideas to engage them. And, you know, this is what would be fun for them, or this is what would be interesting, or this is the kind of data that they need to see. And knowing your purpose and your audience will help you connect with them and get this virtual presence and this virtual communication and this virtual engagement going, so your message gets across. But the third piece
Sorry,
of,
Irma, can I just
yes, yeah.
comment on that? I just want to say, if you're feeling uncomfortable trying to really like empathize and put yourself in the shoes of your audience, it's 100% appropriate to reach out someone in that target demographic and ask. um, you know, how has this been received before? How has this worked before? I think Irma was an incredible example of this when we were putting this together. We had a couple people who had requested something about engaging with the audience, and Irma was like, okay, but why? Like, what problem are we trying to solve? What struggles are they having? How can we actually help them? And really taught me a lot of like, okay, we don't exactly know what their day-to-day actually looks like, but these people do, and they can help us and give us that insight that we need to make the content more applicable and reach more people. So don't be afraid to ask if you're having a hard time with this step. This step is hard. This is hard.
And it's crucial. So it's totally worth investing. That's why plan as early as you can, because investing in this piece will help you make sure that you deliver the outcome that is really necessary. So great point too. So asking your audience, what is it exactly that you need? And then, you know, scraping the surface a little bit, you know, why do you need that? And why is that important? So that you really get to figure out what they need from you and what you're trying to deliver. And, you know, speaking of peeling the onion, let's move to the next slide. Here I'm using this image for a different reason, but this is a concept, a gift. It's probably one of the most powerful messages that I've received and that I've learned regarding public speaking and this idea of creating authenticity in your message, and it is why you. So this comes from public speaking consultant Allison Shapira. She does a lot of training and teaches, is very well known in this area, and she thinks that this is a foundational piece, and I totally agree with. Why are you the most important? Why are you delivering this message? And this is probably the most foundational piece that you need to connect with before you even start a communication, and it will filter through everything that you do in your presentation. But it's often one that we underutilize, or maybe never even stop to ask in our communications. But why you unlocks your authentic voice. It builds your confidence to speak, and it engages your audience, especially in a professional context, right? It's not about your qualifications and what's your title, or you know, because those are external validators. Why you really comes from inside you, and it's why do I care about what I'm saying? Why do I care about this message, or the subject matter, or the work that I do, or the impact that this is having on others? And so it's tied to your pride in your work. It's tied to your contribution. It's tied to the value. Tied to the value that you add. And asking you might actually, I have the onion there, because it might actually require you to start peeling layers of, well, and why? Why is that important to me? Why does that matter? And it could go back to maybe even some of your, it could even go back to your childhood experiences, or definitely, most definitely, it'll go down into your values and maybe your own even sense of purpose. So it can really get very philosophical and very personal. But connecting with that why you piece is going to help you build the confidence. It'll help you, it'll get that authentic, energetic language and tone of voice that Cielo mentioned earlier, so that your purpose and your commitment comes through in all of your communications. So it'll build your confidence, it'll reinforce your credibility, and it'll definitely establish engagement.
Absolutely. So Irma, can I put you on the spot?
Oh, do
Why,
that.
why you for teaching us about engaging with a virtual audience?
Wow, she's something else. See, I love working with her. Um, because I believe in oh, now I'm going to get emotional, because I believe in learning and in growth, because I believe in sharing knowledge, because I have explored a lot of these subjects that I teach on myself before being able to teach them, and I recognize the value and the impact that they have had in my life. And I value growth, learning, education. It's also some of my strengths are in that area. So I'm building on my strengths and sharing the knowledge. It really is very fulfilling. Even when I put extra hours to work on this material, it's very fulfilling because I believe in it.
Absolutely. We were joking the other day. I was getting ready. Was I getting ready to do growth mindset? I think I was getting ready to do growth mindset. We had had a minute to work on this together, and we'd been working. And I was like, I'm I got to go teach on growth mindset, and I need it today. Like I need that class just as much as I'm hoping other people will need it. And I think, yeah, I think a lot of times in these topics that we get to prepare, and especially this virtual presence, it's stuff we need just as much as the people that we're teaching on it. And I hope that we can take what we've learned, because we've had to learn a lot in the last couple of months, and be able to share that with you. So anyway, I totally put you on the spot, and I thought that
No,
was a
that's
great
fine.
answer.
Actually, before we move on, I want us to move on because we're already at 1:29. So I want to make sure that we cover. But there's a question on the chat box that said, "Why the onion?" And the onion is this idea of peeling layers. So finding out why this matters to you. Well, because, and then one more layer. And why is that important to you? And why does that matter to you? So it's this idea of peeling an onion and getting down to another layer and another layer until you get to the core of why this really matters to you.
Yes, the ogre. The ogres are like onions. You've seen Shrek, right? Um, yeah, well, and I think once you get down to the real core of why, I think that comes across when you really understand why it's important and why you're passionate about it. I think that translates to your audience. And we need all the help we can get finding that authenticity when we're doing it through a virtual space. So that is great, and I'll take it from there if that's all right. About preparation. So we've planned it. We have an idea of who our audience is. We're tapped into why this is important. We're feeling passionate. Now let's do everything we can to prepare to make it as good as we can. So the first thing is probably going to be the most obvious in the virtual space is prepare by learning the technology. The more comfortable you are with the tech, the more homework you've done up front, the more comfortable and flexible and adaptable you're going to be when you're on the spot. There is nothing more nerve-wracking in the whole world than technology starting to fail when you're trying to do a presentation. So know your tools and get comfortable with them. Spend time in them. Spend as much time in them as you can. Recognize what you don't know and find people who do know it that can help you fill in those gaps. There are tons of resources put out by UF on how to use Zoom and Teams right now. I think IT has specific resources on them. These are going to be your best friends. Don't be afraid of them. Jump in. If our team can do it in a week, you can learn how to use these tools. I so promise. And the next is to learn the material. You've kind of got a plan in mind. You know what you want to say. Really narrow down what you want to say. Is this in a lesson you're teaching a class? Is this a training that you're doing? Is it a meeting that you're leading? Know what you're going to say. Set your objectives. Know what your goals are. And create an outline how you're going to achieve that. If necessary, try writing a script. If you're having a hard time figuring out how you're going to articulate something, try writing it down. You don't have to stick to that script after you've written it, but even just practicing how to communicate something it can be helpful to write a script. I often start with like a really bare bones script, and then once I get in the flow, I can go from there. But if that's something that you're like really getting hung up on, it doesn't hurt to start with like a little bit of a script.
I'll pitch in and share that Allison Shapiro, one of the, and again, this is like a, she's a pretty well-known and professional, well-seasoned speaker, but she will share this tip. She'll say, she often pastes part of her, or maybe her roadmap, on a wall in front of her camera, or behind her camera, I'm sorry, so she can actually see the main elements of her presentation. She doesn't always memorize it, but she knows kind of these are the main points and these are the elements. So that's one super benefit of, you don't have a teleprompt maybe, but you can put this, just a piece of paper stuck on the wall in front of you, and use that as your main script for maybe at least your opening paragraph or something, or to have like a roadmap of where your presentation is going, and you can follow those. Of course, these days also we have the PowerPoint with the notes, but remember that with virtual you have that extra advantage of using those visuals and keeping that roadmap in front of you, so you have your direction and your skeleton.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really helpful. I think the biggest places I script are like how I'm going to start, how I'm going to transition, and how I'm going to end, because those are always kind of the awkward spots. Even in our run through yesterday, I was like, all right, let's narrow it down, like exactly how we're going to kick this thing off, because I feel like that's always the awkward part. So even if you don't write everything out, maybe just kind of identify those like awkward places and have something in mind for those. All right, and then the last tip during your preparation, you want to prepare for engagement. And I think having a good, clear idea of your audience before you do this step is going to be critical. But as we did at the beginning, kind of took a minute to really think about what caused us to engage or what caused us to disengage as an audience member is going to help you kind of plan and prepare for that engagement during this section. So we just have a couple of tips here, and we did create a one-pager for this that will be up on the Keep Growing website after our webinar. So I'll send out a link with that after so that you guys can kind of tap back into this. But we do have a couple of tips for you on how you can prepare for that engagement before you even start. So our number one thing is we want to keep it short, simple, and to the point. That is a big part of why we started the 1 hour webinar sessions. We learned pretty quickly that 3 hours on a Zoom call is a really long time to be sitting in your chair. So we decided to crush it in and try to fit it in to 45 minutes to an hour as much as we possibly can. So we encourage you to try to do that. Keep it short, keep it simple, and to the point. Our next tip is to segment or chunk the information. So this is actually a principle from learning science, this idea of segmenting material into kind of like bite-sized pieces. Try to cover all the relevant things in one chunk and then move on and kind of wrap them up. So this is its own distinct piece. This is its own distinct piece. Try not to jump around, or we were talking about that, now we're talking about this. Now try to keep it on track and keep it as relevant to what you're talking about as possible. It's a little easier to do that in to get distracted and have side conversations and things like that when we're in person, and try to keep a rein on that. But when you're in a virtual space and people start talking over each other or whatever, it can get really messy. So try to keep it as relevant and as segmented as possible. Third, mix it up. I feel like at this point I should stand up or something to change what I'm doing to re-engage. But that, I mean, that could be a benefit to having the two voices, right? Like when you hear Irma's beautiful voice come on, you're like, ooh, a new voice, something different, right? It kind of mixes it up. It keeps it a variety. It's also why I like to use a little bit of slide template variation when I create my slide decks to kind of mix things up and keep it interesting. Number 4, focus as much on the people as you can and not the platform. I think something I've been very guilty of is I know Zoom can do this, so I need to try to do that, right? Like I know Zoom can do breakout rooms, I know Zoom can do polls, so I want to try to use those tools, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And that's going to depend on the people that you're trying to reach. In some cases, it makes a lot of sense. I don't remember, sorry, who said it, but mentioned the breakout rooms. That was great for interaction. I don't think in this short time that we have, I don't think a breakout room would be super beneficial. So try to focus on the people and how to reach them more than the platform that you're using.
Right. And some of the research that I looked at too, um, included that, like, try not to fall into the trap because these things are like, ooh, it's new and shiny and cool. So try not to fall into the trap of, let me use this tool to see how it works. Use the tool in the service of your learning outcome and what you want the audience to draw from the conversation or the engagement or the communication. So don't adapt the communication to the tools, but use the tools to adapt them to reach your communication outcomes. Keep
Yep.
that in mind.
Yep, absolutely. Design for your goals.
Right.
Not for your tools, absolutely. And then our last note, and this maybe will be a help as you're still learning technology and you're getting comfortable, is to consider a tech buddy or a co-presenter. So when our team did our switch to our virtual courses in a matter of days, I sat in on every single class that week. I was comfortable with Zoom. I knew Zoom really well. Some of the other team members on our team didn't. I wasn't going to highlight Irma specifically, but she's pointing to herself. But I was able to do that. And because I was there, I was able to provide that support, but they were able to learn as well. Like it was never meant to be this is going to be, we're going to do 2-person gigs forever. It was definitely some like a scaffolding or some crutches to help them getting walking into the new technology platform. So that can be a really great resource to get started if you're still feeling a little uneasy about the technology.
Okay. Which leads us to practicing. It's the next P, the third P in public speaking and communication. So even, I'm guessing that if you're in this webinar, you probably are hoping to gain new tips and you're not necessarily a pro in virtual communication and creating engagement. But I think that this even applies to the pros, right? Everyone knows that the best way to improve at anything is to have experience. And the best way to gain experience is through practice. So practice, practice, practice. You know, that's how you get to Carnegie Hall. So this is what we want to share with you now. Like, what are some things that you want to have when you practice? And of course, in the virtual environment, probably the most basic one, this is one of the most important ones that I've learned too, is learn how to humanize your camera. Your audience is in this little device that you have in front of you. And that's how, if you really are aiming to make this connection, you have to personalize that little instrument and that little dot, because that's where your people live. So some tips that we have offered is, you know, do things like smiling to the camera and believing that people are there, or imagining that people are there, not believing, but at least imagining it. Sometimes people have put pictures around the camera, and that also helps them engage and see, like, you know, other people, and smile at the camera, right? That creates an interaction. It just gives it a little bit more of a human aspect of it. Put googly eyes, you know, if you want to, you know, like make the camera come alive and make it seem real. record yourself so that you can get some feedback also, and watch your recording back to see how you look and how that's coming across. And
And
we'll
it's
talk about
gonna be so uncomfortable. Just
it.
be ready to be so uncomfortable as you watch yourself, but it's so worth it, I promise.
It feels really weird, but you have to remember it. If you really want to create the connection, then it's back up to that mindset shift that you need to have. And then, finally, practice makes, and I changed this. We originally had practice makes perfect, but I really want to keep in mind that practice makes better. I don't know that we can aim for perfection in many things in life, but at least we know that with practice, we're going to get better. So practice to make it better. And now we want to give you some additional tips. So maybe humanizing the camera is the top one, but aside from that, here are some more. So the first one is to time your communication. And we do this all the time. We go through our presentations and figure out exactly how much time it's going to take to get one section to the next. So practicing out loud, right now I'm in this room by myself. I did this in my home when I was practicing this webinar. I actually speak out, and when we taught classes down in room 120 where Kara is right now, I would stand in front of an absolutely empty room and speak out and say the class, even though I had no feedback, no nothing, because that way you time your communication and you practice exactly how it's going to sound. It's very tempting to say, oh, well, I know this material because I wrote the slides and I did it all. But when you actually stand up and do it, it sounds completely different, and you might recognize the time that you really need to get the point across, or so practice your timing. Another tip would be to be mindful, right, of smiling. You're on camera, right? So again, just keep that in the back, on the back of your mind. You are on camera. You are also on mic. So remember that everyone can see you and everyone can hear you. I was telling Kara, and I don't know if you were in that webinar with me, but recently we were watching a session where the presenter was very comfortably sitting on a balance ball. And she probably was feeling, hi, Kara's moving. She was probably feeling very at ease, soothing herself, but what we saw on the camera was a lot of this. So remember that you are on camera, and, be mindful that, try not to do this sort of thing. So just remember that you are on camera, and smile to the camera. And same thing with the mic. If you sneeze, if you cough, if you are reaching for your water, you might want to consider muting it so that there's no other distractions. Another tip will be to decide if you want to have a virtual background like I do, or not like Kara does. So it's up to you. There's some cool ones out there. Some people think that the graphics might be a little distracting if you don't have a true green screen on your background. Some people enjoy showing a little bit of like their personal environment and what that looks like, and what do they really, so it's up to you. Just remember, if you do not use a virtual background, well, choose your virtual background accordingly, because that can be very distracting for the the person who's looking at you. But if you are in a room, just make sure that it is a pleasant environment. If you're going to show your background, that it's simple, not distracting, that there's not people walking back and forth, because all of that can create distraction for your audience. Another tip is to anticipate distractions and interruptions. Speaking of people walking by. So one thing I do at home when I am teaching is put a sign on my door. And here at work also, if I'm going to be in a meeting, I just put a sign outside my cubby so people know that I am engaged in a virtual communication, and I minimize the interruptions. I also have this adorable little Chihuahua. Kara knows about this too. So I anticipate when we need to put the doggy away in a separate place so the barking doesn't, you want to minimize the interruptions. That's the main thing. So anticipate and then take adequate measures to address those. It's very annoying when these things get in the way and distract you. Consider standing up. It's a great tool that also Alison Shapira recommends. Kara showed me yesterday that she can put her her computer on her dresser and talk. And of course, your communication and your energy are going to be really strong if you get to deliver standing up. But that's not always a possibility for everyone. So if you can, if not, just remember, again, speaking to your camera and engaging with gestures, with visuals, with changing your tone of voice, with strong strong breathing and delivery. I didn't mention that in Why Me, but I think it's another thing. And you mentioned earlier, Kara, performing, but I think it's another thing. There is an element of performance here, and that is one of my hobbies. So maybe that's another Why Me for for me and this content. And let's see, our last, or maybe we have two more tips, right? Or three. So play with your screen, right? And opening the chat boxes and any participant windows. These are other things that we also want to practice. And we actually set them up before all of the sessions. So where are those screens going to be? Where are you going to be looking at? Especially if you want to remember to keep your eye on the camera, then where else is, what else is your perimeter vision going to be watching? Because yeah, you want to have access to the chat box and to the participant box and all those other things. So practice with those things. And then practice your first 5 minutes, as Kara said earlier. That's really where you kick off and where you give this original sense of ownership and confidence and credibility and authenticity. So spend extra time practicing, especially those first 5 opening minutes. How are you going to kick this off, and how are you going to make people feel at ease? That's how you're going to get that initial impression and that initial engagement. And finally, test drive some recovery tactics. So hope for the best, but prepare for the not so good. So kind of anticipate what would happen if, if we get disconnected, if the sound is not working. This is why Kara suggested having a tech buddy. That can be really helpful. But anticipate what you might need in those instances. So okay, those are my, oh, and then finally, no, I'm sorry, one more. Speak and seek and use feedback. So recognize the importance of feedback and actively pursue it, like ask for it, and then decide what are you going to use, because not all feedback is necessarily valuable, but ask things about, ask specific things, how does it look from your end? How are my sound settings? How is my, am I properly placed on the camera? How can I improve my delivery? What did I do well? What was engaging? What worked for you? What could be different? Having test driving with an audience similar to the audience that you're going to deliver to will also give you great insight and great information, because then that is the audience that you're trying to reach, and they'll tell you, well, that was boring, or I did not get that at all, or I really needed this to be a little bit more supported with data and visuals and things that are going to get the delivery across. Let me pass it on to Kara.
Yes. So I know you guys like to think that Irma and I come into these webinars or into our classes and we're just so naturally good at presenting and it all just comes really naturally, but we have to do all of these things before we present. There is not a class or a webinar that we've delivered that we haven't done a lot of legwork up front. There are some that we've delivered that didn't have as much, and you could probably tell if you went back and watched them that we didn't prepare maybe as much as we could have or should have. But there's definitely not one that we haven't put in a lot of that preparation and that practice before we start.
Maybe the early ones that we did during the transition is like, no, we need to roll out with this and do our best. So practice made better.
It made better.
Every day it's making better and better and better.
Yeah. So I just say that because there's definitely an element of like natural like comfort speaking in front of people that maybe some people are more inclined to, but no one comes into this just like perfect, capable, confident day one. Like it takes work and it takes effort. So we want to give you guys those tools and give you the 4 P's, but especially the 3 that come before presenting, so that you're set up for your best chance of success. If you don't do one of those 3, then it's on you, because now we've told you, you know the work that you need to do now. But if you have done those 3, you're going to be able to jump into your presentation feeling so much more confident, so much more comfortable, and that's what's going to let you be your authentic self for your presentation. So when it's time to present, make sure you have set your scene. And Irma alluded to this a little bit, but but don't use your camera as a mirror, and make sure you're set up in an appropriate thing before you start. So I like to set up my Zoom meetings to have a waiting room so that I can jump in, make sure everything looks the way I want it to before I let people start coming in. We were able, Irma and I were able to have like a little bit of a powwow before we let everybody in, kind of get on the same page and make sure, like, can you hear me? I can hear you. Can you see me? Okay, do we look good? Do I look fine? Is there anything in my teeth? We were able to do all of that before everybody started coming in. Also, at those first couple minutes, it's really important to set the expectations, communicate the expectations for the presentation. We like to give the objectives and an outline. So we kind of communicated, we're going to go through the 4 Ps and prepare you to own your virtual presence and engage with a virtual audience. And we also want to determine the tone. We tried our best. I don't know if you guys noticed when you came in, that was rehearsed beforehand, but we wanted it to feel comfortable. So we were engaging in a little bit of chatting, just shooting the breeze a little bit, and that helped us feel a little more relaxed. But we also wanted to set the tone that this is going to be a relaxed thing. This isn't meant to be a formal, strict presentation. It's supposed to be a collaboration, and you're welcome to participate as much as you wanted to. So we tried to set that tone from the beginning. You can let us know whether or not we were successful. But we also want to say to try to engage with the audience the way that you would if you were in person. Try to think, we were talking about it when we were preparing. If you all had come to this classroom, as you came in, I would go up and say, hi, I haven't met you. I'm Kara. What's your name? And I would try to get to know you all individually before we get started. And I want you to think of your virtual space like the physical space in that regard. So as people were coming in, Irma was trying to welcome everybody as much as we could as they were coming in, and we do try to get to know you as much as we can, even in a virtual space, before we get started.
Thank you for the feedback. We're getting good feedback on the chat box.
Oh, good. That is really good to hear. So the other thing that we did want to talk a little bit about, something that we've kind of had to learn and adapt to being in a virtual space that you might also have to learn to adapt to is that checking for understanding, making sure that you're accomplishing your objective. So if your objective is to inform, do people understand what you're saying? Is your objective to communicate or to connect with other people? How can you see that connection is really registering? And this is where it's going to take a little more work, or at least, like Irma was saying, a shift in mindset to kind of get in the habit of doing. So something Irma and I have started to get really comfortable with is, throw it in the chat box if you have feedback or if you have questions or something. That's something that we've had to get used to saying, is to use that chat instead of watching for people to nod. And some of you who've been to a lot of my webinars, I'll say, like, give me some sort of thumbs up or or something to let me know that there are people out there, and getting used to that. So that goes back to knowing your tech, making sure you know what your tools are. Have people give feedback in the chats. There are all those different reactions in Zoom. You can do like the thumbs up, right? I don't know if I have those because I'm a host, but you could do, right, like the thumbs up or the clapping, right? Like,
yeah, the participants should have that. I don't think the hosts
okay,
have those, but the participants do. If you want to play with them, feel free.
But then we can see those, or you can raise your hand, right? There's the hand raising feature. Zoom also lets you do polls. I've done this in a couple of my classes just to see, like, did this make sense? Gestures on our team, we do a lot of thumbs ups in our meetings. We do not the like reaction, but just like physically saying, yeah, we did it. Yeah, we get it. All right, Bob, we can move on now. We're good. And then if it's appropriate, if it's a smaller team meeting or a smaller training, like, just talk like you would. Try to be mindful of not talking over each other, because in Zoom it does get messy, but we've kind of developed a system on our team where we'll kind of raise our hand and say, like, hey, I'm going to talk next. You finish, but I'm going to go next, and trying to create that norm. And it takes a little bit of practice, and it'll be good to go. Okay. So last, and our big thing, our real big takeaway, if you learn nothing else today, we just want you to be yourselves. Be yourself in your virtual space. It might take a little bit to feel like yourself in a virtual space, but I like to say, be the youest you that you can be. That's my favorite. Like, just try to be as authentic and as real, and just the youest you that you can be, and it'll get more comfortable as you go. So we are getting to the end of our time with you, and we're so grateful for your time. I do want to just leave you with this idea. We talked about confidence and authenticity, and the key to all of these things is preparation. And once you've practiced what you've prepared, you'll feel really confident. And if you understand your purpose, that confidence will turn into authenticity. So do the work, prepare, practice a lot, and do some digging to really understand what your purpose is and why you're the most important person to be delivering your message, and and that will foster connection with you and your virtual audience.
And you got this. We know you can do it. So
Yes.